Forgive Me. Story by Carmel Recknitzer. Performed by James Reese. Thea's forgive me, prayed Cresconio, as he inserted his picks into the church's cellar door lock. A moonless night provided no light, and he hoped that meant his god wasn't watching. His fingers were old and gnarled, and his whole body already ached from hunching over his work. Still, the old skills were coming to him. Picking locks was just like dancing. Once you settled into the rhythm of it, the steps came back. Well, no. As he shivered in the cold and struggled with the lock, he decided the whole business was closer to dueling. During the War of the Cross, he had been an accomplished student of the Soldano sword school. He'd picked away at his opponents with a rapier in each hand, confident, cunning, lightning fast. Now? Well, now he was a down-and-out tercio. He was pathetically out of practice, and that matched the pathetic size of his new dueling steels. He prodded, he feinted, he enticed the lock, and with a sad little flourish, broke it open. A joy to have a victory again, after many long years of defeat. There was also some poetry in carrying out this victory, this theft, against none other than Caspar Dietrich. The Eisen General had been the most fearsome commander of the blaspheming objectionists. The old anger stirred deep in his gut, and the old hate bloomed in his heart. There was no better man in this city to steal from, no man who deserved misfortune more. Not that Theus considered vengeance all that virtuous, though. Twice the victory, twice the sin. Theus, forgive me, he muttered again. He took a quick look at the building's steeple, examined the stained glass windows, hoping any of the angelic figures depicted would move and chide him no. But why would objectionist saints help him? Besides, there had been no miracles for his poor lost boy. There would be no miracles for old Cresconio either. Without another word, he dropped into the underbelly of the church. There were no torches down here. He'd have to make his way through the labyrinthian innards of the church by touch. Cresconio gathered his courage and ran his fingers across the damp, mold-covered bricks. 2 lefts and you're there, Cresconio, he'd been promised. But it had been a decade since he trusted another human being. He'd paid dearly for the information, but he refused to mistake the scarcity of gold for the rarer scarcity of truth. He would have trusted his ears once upon a time, but they had never recovered from the bombastic roar of cannon fire. For now, all he could hear was the panicked beating of his heart. Except, no, there was someone else down here. Cresconio couldn't afford anything better than pauper's rags for his calloused feet. Someone was padding around this place in hard-toe boots. Even his ruined ears could hear the soft clack against the rotting floorboards. Instead of taking the second left in the hallway, he peeked past it. He saw only darkness. "Theus, forgive me," came someone else's voice. That same someone down the hallway struck a match and kneeled in front of a heavy vault door. The unknown burglar began fighting its lock. Cresconio couldn't make out much. The other sneak's body hid the flame, and the silhouette could belong to any leather-clad man or woman you'd find on the street. To Cresconio's horror, his unwelcome adversary managed to undo the lock with ease. Who else could have known about the crystal eye? Who would have the riches to hire such an accomplished thief to retrieve it? Theus, forgive me, he repeated, and silently crept behind his unknowing rival. in the 7 steps it took to close the distance, he had just enough time for doubt to creep in. How many times in one night would Theos listen to the same repeated prayer? How far could he push against the rules of God and man? This whole pathetic heist was blown. Why wasn't he running away? He clasped his hands together to pummel the would-be thief. Regret seized his heart, but could not seize his arms in mid-motion. The half-hearted blow landed hard, but not hard enough. The adversary didn't collapse into unconsciousness. Instead, they swore loudly and tumbled forward into the vault. Conscious that more noise would damn them both, Grasconio dived in after them, hands desperate to find a mouth to clasp, a throat to squeeze, a gut to punch the air from. He had to maintain silence. Instead, the adversary's reflexive elbow caught his groin. In an attempt to stay quiet, he nearly bit through his lower lip. A mad scramble of limbs followed, and he honestly couldn't tell which extremity belonged to who. It didn't take long for the adversary to overtake him. Their arms were muscled, vigorous with youth. The frail Grasconio found himself pinned, face down to the floor, nose literally pressed against the treasure chest he'd risked his life for. So be it. Dying this close to glory might be enough to earn his son's forgiveness. Probably not, but he could plead his case in the afterlife.
"Wait, who are you?"
hissed his rival. The voice chimed indignant and sharp.
"Some Vaticine Inquisitor?"
"I'm the Hierophant himself, you worthless cur," Grasconio wheezed, his voice laden with bile he barely managed to keep down. It wasn't the wittiest retort of his career, but it would have to do.
"And I'm Jolly Devil Jonah, here to drag your lying ass to hell,"
came the unimpressed reply. The adversary attempted to flip him over. Grasconio pulled out his last desperate trick. He'd hidden a thief's twist up his ragged sleeve. The little packet of paper contained powdered chili peppers and masonry dust. The vile mixture would gum up the eyelids, inflame the nose, and scorch the lungs. It would have been an ingenious little trick, had the two of them not been so close together. The nasty cloud caught them both, and they rolled away from each other in a bid to catch their breath and wipe their eyes. The match, however, had gone out. Grasconio realized any attempt to clear his vision would be a waste of time. His hands shot to his belt, drawing cheap knives. He lunged towards the other thief, or at least where he assumed they'd be. He was drawn short, however, by the press of a dagger against his throat. "Hold your horses," they demanded. Knowing the adversary couldn't see him, he promised to surrender as he slowly sought their kidneys. It took them a moment to realize the stalemate, but they gave a satisfying curse once they did. "No one wins a knife fight, my lord. Or is it my lady?" he said. In the dark, he genuinely couldn't tell. His blasted ears were so dull, he couldn't draw out the timbre of the voice either. Not that it mattered in the end. "Let's call this duel a draw."
"And then what?"
they demanded.
"The first to put up their knife will be stabbed."
Thea's help him, the words were so young, bristling with the anger of someone who had yet to learn that life owed them no favors. "How old are you, stranger?" he asked.
"What's it matter to you?"
came a whisper. Do an old man a favor, before we gut each other like fish." A tense moment passed between them. Realizing they had no real hope of diffusing the situation otherwise, they gave an exasperated sigh.
"I'm grown," they insisted. "I've taken lives before. What's it to you?"
Such affronted bluster. Was this fellow thief younger than his boy had been? "Theas, forgive me," screamed his soul. The will to fight, which honestly hadn't burned so hot to start with, was now smothered. He didn't let his knife down, though. Too much was at stake. "And what are you doing here? Trying to steal from the fearsome Caspar Dietrich?" he asked. He had to work hard to keep his voice from breaking. He could sense their apprehension. almost hear them calculating the chances of getting out of this alive. But no one wins a knife fight, as he had said himself. Cresconio's throat would be slit, that was certain. But the adversary would have to crawl out from this dungeon in agonizing pain, praying to find medical attention.
Old Iron Dietrich believes the eye is nothing but foul sorcery, something to lock away and hide forever, they explained. But I'm not convinced. There is much to study, much to learn. Do you know what the eye can do, what it can show? Knowledge is power. Ignorance is a danger to my cause.
The knife tickled the apple of his throat, as if to ask, "And what about you?"
"My son," he began. His voice was so raw, he had to swallow back the tears. "My son. He had a real future ahead of him. He refused to become a petty burglar like me. He joined some dandy archaeologist, went out to make a real living, to make something of himself and leave a mark on this cursed world."
He could feel realization dawn within his rifle, feel the pity and disgust that filled their chest.
I don't know," he admitted, "if he ever made it back. He may have died at sea, in the ruins of Cyrna, at the hands of Caspar or your masters. But I know he's gone. A description of this relic, and suddenly the letters stop. I had to see. I had to confirm what he died for. Had to let people know, so his name would live on."
Cresconio knew he'd have no chance. There was no time to build trust, to share in discovery. Even if his adversary offered mercy, was Cresconio brave enough to peer into the eye? What future would it show to a man so spent and all alone? What little good fate had to offer him was all in the past. His best friends, his youth, his health, all gone. All had been lost in the fires of the War of the Cross. His boy was gone. His little petty scheme for redemption had already sputtered out, too.
"What was his name?"
the adversary asked. It wasn't a desperate ploy, thought Cresconio. His ears were damnably awful, but he heard the thread of empathy in the words that came next.
"It will live on with me, poor sir. Tell me his name."
"Gonzalo," he whispered. If this was the best Thea would offer, Cresconio supposed he had to take it.
"Gonzalo won't have died in vain," they promised. "Even if others are too scared to seek the truth, I am not. The city of 5 Sails will prosper for his sacrifice. I will keep his name in my heart. I will pray for Gonzalo."
That would have to do. He tried his best. This wasn't so bad as endings went. Cresconio dropped his knives. Even his ruined ears caught their soft ring as they clattered to the floor.
"Any last prayers?"
Cresconio didn't have the strength or courage to utter his final words aloud.
"Theos, forgive me," he mouthed. "And maybe I could forgive you too."
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe for our future episodes, and check out 7th Sea, City of 5 Sails, a living card game. You can find out more about the game and our community on Discord. The link is below. The 7th CIP is owned by Chaosium Incorporated.